Hello, beautiful souls. Thank you so very much for dropping by this video. Oh, very warm welcome. We're going to be talking tonight about an interesting topic. Is life meaningless or not? But before we hop into that, warm welcome to anyone who's new. On this channel, I talk about the difference between fake and actual non-duality. Who knew that there were two types? Who knew that there was even such a thing as fake non-duality? I sure didn't. And because I didn't know that, I was caught in it for a good 20 plus years, and it nearly destroyed me. I'm very lucky to have made it out. Most people don't make it out. And some people have had and will have their lives literally destroyed by this distorted, false, delusional teaching. And tonight we're going to look at, or I intend to look at, one of the center points of the Neo-Advaita distortion. And that is, there we go, there's a little more light. And that is the idea that life is meaningless. So most Neo-Advaita teachers won't come straight out and say this. A few of them will. I heard about one Neo-Advaita teacher who I've had my eye on. I met them online, debated a little bit, and then actually have had other people tell me about this person. And this person isn't huge. They're kind of medium big. You know, they've published a book. They have online satsangs. They have quite an online following, but they're not gigantic, but they're not little either. And so they have a public and a private teaching. In public, they talk very poetically, very charmingly, kindly. It seems to be almost very sophisticated, actually. And then, but privately, once you've kind of made it through that, and once this teacher senses that, well, teacher, got to put that in quotes, once this teacher senses that you're very committed to what he's saying and you don't have a lot of resistance anymore, then comes the more private teaching that everything is an illusion, you don't exist, life is meaningless, you have no free will, you can't do anything, everything is predetermined. That's his private teaching. It's very interesting to me that he doesn't share that with the public. That first he shares his more poetic, flowery, kind, happy teaching, and then he kind of debate and push and get you to the point where you don't have resistance, and then will slap you with this nihilism. It's nothing more and nothing less than nihilism, that nothing, in essence, nothing exists and nothing matters. So that's one of the most flagrant examples of it that I have had brought to my awareness. A lot of how Neo-Advaita teachers talk about this is in less direct ways, such as you must detach from everything material, or everything material is temporary, or nothing can compare to the bliss of the self. Now, I believe there's some truth to each of those teachings, but they're taught in such a unskillful way that they literally invite and encourage people to just turn their back on the world, just to detach in an unhealthy way. And by the way, detachment, I've been told by a very legitimate guru and swami, that detachment is actually a very poor translation of the Sanskrit term. The Sanskrit term is vairagya, which means binding desires. So the goal is not to, in traditional Advaita, not to get rid of all desires or completely turn your back on life, but to find freedom from those desires that bind, those desires that create suffering. A beautiful way to tell is you go to your favorite restaurant, you're like all excited to get your favorite meal, and let's say they're out of it. Well, if you get, it's one thing to be like, oh, too bad. But if you get like really upset about it, that's an example of a binding desire, wherein a desire, a preference, is actually natural, healthy, and built in to, I don't want to say personality, because that's so abstract. But in traditional Advaita view, there's different ways of looking at what does it mean to be a human being. One way is called the five sheaths, Sheath, or the Sanskrit word is kosha, or covering, and that the human being is made of these different layers: physical, energetic, mental, higher mind. And then one of the sheaths is a little complicated to talk about. It's called the bliss sheath, but not exactly the same bliss as normally talked about. It's very technical. I don't fully have a grasp of it. I'm still learning. I'm not going to get into it now. But regardless, that there's different levels of what it is to be a human, and preferences are built into that and actually needed. We need to have some kind of preference for things that are healthy and things that are not healthy. Otherwise, as the saying goes, you put your hand on a hot stove and you would just leave it there. So the problem is not, you could say, desire or preferences. It's those that bind. But that subtlety is not communicated in Neo-Advaita satsangs. And so what happens? People just completely turn away from everything. They turn away from the world. They turn away from their feelings. They turn away from their body. And I would know all about this because I did it for almost 20 years, or I battled. I kind of went back and forth between like, I'm going to turn away from everything, but I have this inspiration I want to do, so I'll do it for a little bit. No, I'm going to turn away, but I want to get involved in this relationship. No, I'm going to turn away. It was this crazy back and forth. Whereas traditional Advaita has this compass of this notion of dharma and meeting the person where they are and helping them take the next step forward, and preparatory practices before self-inquiry, before the final practice of self-inquiry. So, but Neo-Advaita, Neo-Advaita and traditional Advaita would agree on certain things, that nothing in this world can give you lasting happiness. Like, that's just a fact. Is there anything that anyone here is aware of that will give you permanent and lasting happiness in the world? No, because if so, everyone would just do that one thing 24/7, right? So Advaita and Neo-Advaita would agree on that. And Advaita would say, in a kind of gentle, holistic way, so cultivate devotion towards God. Cultivate devotion towards doing your duty and doing seva, service. Cultivate working on your character and developing virtues. And over time, you'll just become less interested in seeking happiness in the world. Neo-Advaita, on the other hand, will say things like, just inquire, just turn away, just detach. One Neo-Advaita teacher gave the teaching, just let everything go. One of their students practiced that and slowly went crazy and actually killed themselves. Because that's not a real teaching, just let everything go. It's this vague, hazy. But all these different Neo-Advaita teachings, let everything go, just inquire, turn away from the world, they're all rooted in this idea that life itself is meaningless. And hence Neo-Advaita is a kind of escapism. I see I have a comment here. Pat, hi. Thanks for saying hello. But they're all rooted in this very intense duality. that the world is an illusion and only consciousness is true. Now, here's where the plot thickens. Adi Shankara taught something similar, but many Neo-Advaita teachers won't even say the world is an illusion. They will, but they'll say the world is unreal or doesn't exist. Only the self is real. Now, Adi Shankara taught something similar. He taught a triad of 3 assertions about reality. Brahman alone is Sat. Sat means eternal, unchanging, uncaused, absolute. The world is Asat. The world is changing, not eternal, dependent. The world is dependent on, Asat doesn't mean, Asat just means not eternal and constantly changing. Another word that's often used is mithya. That gets mistranslated as untrue or unreal, but mithya just means dependent. The world is dependent. It's not independent, whereas Brahman, the supreme reality, is independent. The world is actually dependent on Brahman. And similarly has a beginning and an end. It was put together and hence it will come apart. So again, to back up a little bit, Adi Shankara made 3 assertions about reality. Brahman alone is real. Brahman alone is Sat. We need to stick with the Sanskrit, otherwise it's going to get real confusing. The world is Asat. And then here's the 3rd assertion that Neo-Advaita teachers don't understand and don't teach. The world is Brahman. That's non-duality, where the eternal, unchanging absolute, it's taught, is one and the same with the not eternal, constantly changing world, which would include all the aspects of what it is to be a human being. Neo-Advaita says, doesn't like to talk about Sanskrit because everything gets lost in translation. Neo-Advaita will say the self or consciousness alone is real, the world is unreal, full stop. It never takes that 3rd step, which unifies ultimate reality with relative reality, with creation, because Neo-Advaita loves to deny creation, loves to say it doesn't exist. That's actually just a mistranslation of a Sanskrit word. And so I don't know which came first. I don't know whether the nihilism of life is meaningless came first or the mistranslation came first. But now Neo-Advaita is just preaching a message of nihilism. And you can see it when they talk about the self. Neo-Advaita teachers often talk about emptiness, nothingness, spaciousness, whereas traditional Advaita teachers will talk about eternal conscious Ananda. Ananda can be translated in many ways: wholeness, peace, bliss. Traditional Advaita teachers also include the notion that there is a deep connection between Ananda and love. Neo-Advaita seems obsessed with emptiness, nothingness. So my Neo-Advaita journey began when, without a guru, I was introduced to some Advaita Vedanta, and I would read things like enlightenment was considered the most important thing, and that all the other things of the world only gave temporary happiness. And from there, I concluded that everything else was meaningless. So that started a split within me. And then once that split was there, Then I found my way to a full-on Neo-Advaita cult that was hardcore, like worse than anyone I'm aware of that's out there right now. Like this cult, it was an actual cult where people live there, and it actually made it on the television show 60 Minutes. It was so bad and so infamous. And, in this cult, it was just hardcore. Nothing exists, nothing matters, you don't exist, everything's an illusion, like over and over and over, day after day, a group of people living together, saying these things to each other and reinforcing them. I'm very lucky I made it out of that. After that, I drifted more towards maybe what's kind of more of a standard Neo-Advaita. That was like hardcore Neo-Advaita. And so I've shared quite a bit about my healing and recovery journey and leaving that. And the latest phase of it is really unpacking this idea that life is meaningless. Part of what really helped us was studying with a traditional Advaita teacher. And she straight off the bat said that in traditional Advaita, Bhagavan, which is not quite God, but you could say God or the Lord or the Creator. In Advaita Vedanta, Bhagavan and Dharma are non-negotiable. Now I'll break down what that means, but I'd like to say it again. In traditional Advaita Vedanta, Bhagavan and Dharma are non-negotiable. That in traditional Advaita, it's absolutely necessary to cultivate a relationship with the creator of the universe and to cultivate a sense of Dharma. Now, cultivating a relationship with the creator can take many different forms. Bhakti being the main form, but the other form is, dedicating your life to serving the creator. And I don't even want to use the word creator because that's a Western word and it doesn't really fit in with traditional Advaita, but again, lost in translation. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about Dharma. Dharma is a complex word, and we've heard of it within the Buddhist context, but this is within a Vedic context. Vedic being a fancy word for the traditional philosophies of India. Dharma means harmony, and it means that which sustains the harmony of creation, of life itself. Dharma has to do with relationship, how I relate to you, how my family unit, how we relate, how I relate with the people in my neighborhood, how people within a city get along within a country, how people relate to an environment. It's all based on cultivating harmonious interactions. Now, this is completely foreign to Neo-Advaita because nothing exists and life is meaningless, whereas traditional Advaita is absolute foundation. And it makes sense. If you're cultivating oneness with everything, you need to know how to get along with everybody. It seems so common sense, right? In hindsight, it seems so common sense because Neo-Advaita is like achieve oneness through dissociative meditation. Traditional Advaita says achieve oneness through, yes, cultivating advanced meditative practices when you're ready for it, and learning how to navigate the world in a harmonious manner, learning how to navigate as if everything is one, which then sets the stage for the realization and the living and the embodiment of the idea that everything is one. Without that foundation, you have Neo-Advaita, a dissociative, meditative state, and a whole lot of talking, repeating the same ideas over and over, that nothing exists, that nothing matters, that you don't exist, just inquire, and so forth and so on. So studying with this traditional Advaita Swami was utterly profound. And next time she offers a course, I will announce it here on this channel. It was just one more step in my journey, and because it makes so much sense that our spiritual life would need to be integrated with life. It just makes so much sense, but that's not what Neo-Advaita teaches. Again, it just teaches this dissociative philosophy and spiritual practice. So what went on, I got what's called the full vision of Advaita Vedanta. And I don't mean the full vision of oneness, meaning that I experienced oneness with everything, but I got a philosophical blueprint or map of the path, of what it would mean to live that, of what is, how do we make sense of the idea of creator, creation, and me? How can those three things be one? So in a very skillful manner, I was given again, a map or a blueprint, or you could even say a language to think about these things in a reasonable manner, and also in a way that made sense, and not in a way where I just had to keep repeating to myself, I don't exist. The world doesn't exist. Everything's predetermined. I mean, it's kind of funny. Neo-Advaita comes down to about 10 ideas repeated over and over again. So it's very profound and very shocking to have an Advaita Vedanta teacher, a non-duality teacher, an actual non-duality teacher, teaching myself and this group of people, in essence, spiritual life skills. Not in the sense of like, here's how you can save 10% on your car insurance, but on how to be a better person, how to live more harmoniously, how to work with our emotions in a way that moved us forward on the spiritual path and prepared us for the seeing and the living and the embodying of this blueprint that she very skillfully laid out. So in traditional Advaita, it's like you're taught this kind of blueprint, and then you're a map, and then you're skillfully led along a journey. Whereas Neo-Advaita is a little more like going to church, where you just kind of get kind of different ideas each week, and they sometimes fit together, sometimes don't, occasionally contradict each other, but there's no real sense of process or like, where am I going or what am I doing? It's just like, okay, I got to keep going to satsang. I got to keep inquiring, keep reminding myself that I don't exist. I need to remind myself that I don't exist. So in traditional Advaita, there's this built-in sense that creation is one with creator, is not separate. That's non-duality. And there's a teaching for how to live that. I've talked quite a bit about karma yoga and bhakti yoga as two of the parts of that. Another part, which was quite profound, is called, let me see if I can remember the Sanskrit. I believe it's Vibhuti Bhava. Prasadam. Oh, I cannot remember. Prasadam Buddhi, or something along, having the mind of that everything that comes to you was given to you by God. The idea being that the creator, but I don't even want to say creator, that Bhagavan, the ruler is maybe a better word, or the orchestrator of reality, is guiding everything that happens. So right there is almost the denial of the idea that life is meaningless. Because there's the idea that there is an order and a structure and a harmony. And in fact, that it's a divine sport or game that the divine is playing, in essence, with itself. A few more things to say, but let's see. Marian, hi. People need to read and study original spiritual text. That's how I thank you, Marian, as always. You're right on the money. That's part of how I escaped from Neo-Advaita, was going back to the source text, going back to the Bhagavad Gita, and going back to what Ramana Maharshi actually said versus just cherry-picked verses. Neo-Advaita teachers will teach about like 5% of what Ramana actually taught, if it's even that high. I don't know. It might be 7%. It might be even lower. If you go back and read what Ramana actually wrote, in Neo-Advaita satsangs, you get such a small part. So I want to close by, well, not quite yet. I want to say, so this part of the Neo-Advaita brainwashing, and it truly is brainwashing. The further I go down this path, the further of recovery, the further I see, oh my God, Neo-Advaita is brainwashing. The further I go down this path of unbrainwashing or washing the brainwashing out, there's just layers. And this is kind of the latest layer of this idea that life is meaningless and nothing matters. And I've been working on letting it go for quite some time, and I'm making progress on it. And part of the resistance is that Neo-Advaita is escapism. Like any drug, like any addiction, you just don't have to deal with life. Right? Like if you think life is meaningless, then it doesn't really matter what you do. It's a way to escape and to not have to grow up. And I guess I didn't want to grow up. I guess I had Peter Pan syndrome. I wouldn't say I guess. I had Peter Pan syndrome. Still do, recovering from it. So with all that said, I'll close with, you may have noticed for this video, the picture of it was this picture of a family, and it said, "Life is beautiful." For those of you who don't know, it's a very powerful movie called Life is Beautiful, set in Italy. It's a very intense movie. And it is a deeply moving movie. Part of why I chose it as the picture is because things matter. What we do matters. Part of being human is to be touched by beauty, by kindness. Yes, being touched by beauty is probably not going to lead to liberation or moksha, although there's beautiful stories of Zen monks having awakening and enlightenment experiences from beauty. It's just not maybe considered the most classical way to wake up. But that's kind of the fundamental Neo-Advaita lie, that the only thing that matters is enlightenment. Everything else is meaningless. So as you can see, we're not at non-duality, but Neo-Advaita is extreme duality. Only enlightenment matters, everything else is meaningless. That's the Neo-Advaita, one of the fundamental Neo-Advaita lies. So if you haven't seen that movie, it's one of my favorites. It's a very deep movie. It's a super tearjerker. And Things that are really meaningful or beautiful really poke through the Neo-Advaita lie. Because the Neo-Advaita, so there's a character in that movie who, I don't want to give it away, but there's a character in that movie who does some very moving and beautiful things. So if you follow Neo-Advaita all the way, you're forced to say, it doesn't matter what he did. And I would know, because I used to think that way. Or I'd think that way half the time. I was in this constant war with, that's amazing. Oh, wait, nothing matters. But that's so moving. That's so beautiful. Only the self matters. But, what that person did was amazing. What an amazing being. Unless they were pursuing enlightenment, they were just engaging with illusion. So as you can see, Neo-Advaita kind of creates these two voices in your head. It didn't me anyway. And I'm grateful to say that the Neo-Advaita voice is now almost completely silent in me. And that while life can be excruciatingly painful, I find it to be exquisitely beautiful. And that even the pain and the sufferings and challenge, with a little hindsight, sometimes a lot of hindsight, and a bigger perspective, that has a beauty as well. Marion, beautifully said. Enjoy the life, but do not cling to it. Because life is beautiful. That's half the truth. The other half is, and it's fleeting, and it's painful. And if you cling to it, intense suffering happens. And for me, that's not just a spiritual teaching anymore. I'm convinced of the truth of it, that if when I cling to life, it really hurts. But when I reject life, I become dysfunctional, and that really hurts as well. Thank you so very much for dropping by, Marion. Always appreciate your input. Oh, enjoy the Leela. Leela, for those who are unfamiliar, Leela means play, the divine sport, which is a philosophical, a very deep way of talking about the experience of life. Thank you. I didn't catch that. All right, beautiful souls. I wish you blessed enjoying and being moved and touched without clinging. Take care. Big love.